Hello, how are you doing today?
I'm good, Dr. Florence. How are you?
I'm well. So, by way of introductions, I am Dr. Myron Krys Florence. I am a Louisville postdoctoral fellow here at Union Theological Seminary. I'm teaching in the area of psychology and religion, and I have been here since fall of 2023, coming up on my last year here,
Oh,
my first full year here.
I feel like, oh, but you're here another year.
Yes,
Okay. I was
yes,
like, you just got here.
yes.
Well, I am Tyrone Davis Jr. I am just about to complete my first year here at Union Theological Seminary. I am a dual degree student studying divinity and social work at Hunter College. And I'm interested in all things sexuality, spirituality, liberation, especially as it regards Black men of color.
Mhm. So you made me think about that something else that I do outside of teaching is also I'm a psychotherapist, and I work in the area of LGBTQIA plus people as well as people that are polyamorous. So I have a lot of relationship clients that are opening their relationship or their relationship is already open and kind of working through communication and making sure they stay healthy, whatever that looks like and entails for them.
Mhm.
And then we also have a couple clients that are into BDSM. So
Amazing.
yeah.
So tell me, why is it that you do what you do?
Unfortunately, that's the wrong way to start something, but unfortunately, I do what I do out of what I did not receive,
Mm.
out of hurt, out of pain. I grew up in the Pentecostal non-denominational Black church, and we did not talk about sexuality. We didn't talk about a lot of things as far as body and personhood. We just kind of we talked about God and spirituality, and Jesus was the answer for every single thing
Mhm.
that we ever could think about. But we never really talked about what does it mean to have sex? What does it mean to have good sex? What does it mean to have sex outside of the bonds of marriage? Because all of that was off limits. So uh, for me, it's kind of long story short, it is a way of opening up conversations for people to feel safe. So I desire to make those spaces where people can feel safe to discuss whatever they're feeling without. I work through a lot of religious trauma and
Mhm.
people that have come from backgrounds similar to mine where they could not feel free. So there's a lot of shame and guilt around their bodies and sexuality and all those things. So that's one of the reasons why I do what I do. But I'm also wondering about you. You're a sex educator. Why do you do what you do?
Um, I do what I do because of something you just said, like providing space for people to talk about sex,
Hmm.
which I have found as a sex educator is all you need. I think that, we live in a society that is very confusing about how we invite people to engage with
Hmm.
sexuality.
Hmm.
And sadly, just simply talking about it in meaningful, authentic ways is not one of those ways that we encourage people to talk about sex.
Hmm.
And why I come to this work is for many reasons. One, my own personal journey around sexuality, very similar to you. I didn't really have any um, conversations around
Hmm.
sex when I was growing up. I think the only time I engaged with conversations around sex were in the church when they were saying sex is bad,
Yeah, yeah.
gay sex is bad,
Yeah.
or in schools where it was another version of sex is bad, right? It was
Hmm.
like sex, but from the lens of wait until you're married or don't get an STI,
Hmm.
don't get pregnant. I grew up in the 90s, sort of kind of at the tail end of the HIV, not the end of it, but
Yeah, yeah.
we were still, going through some of the major moments of HIV AIDS. And so um, I grew up being very frightened of sex.
Yeah.
And and so I come to this work with that, and I come to this work hoping that I can help folks engage with conversations around sex that aren't fear based
Hmm.
or that aren't shameful or guilt ridden,
Hmm.
and invite them to kind of engage with it in a new way that is liberatory and talks about pleasure and talks about consent and boundaries and body acceptance. And um, I also come to it too with sort of a larger. I'm very much interested in how um, macro oppression affects the individual's sexuality, and so
Hmm.
how does white supremacy? How does racism affect Black men of color? How does patriarchy and all these things? Um, so that's why I come to it.
Oh, yeah, yeah. So I'm thinking about, because you just did amazing. I went to your one person show,
Thank you.
and you started that show with the question for all of us: what do you think? What do you wish you would have known or been taught about sex, along those
Yeah,
lines?
that's right.
So, what's your answer to that? What do you wish you would have been taught about sex growing up?
Whew, again, so many things. One, I wish I'd been taught about queer sex. I think we do. There's nothing. Or there was nothing at the time around the mechanics of gay sex, to be specific, same sex for men.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think one of the tragedies, and also one of the gifts, I should say, with queer people is that because we have no education around like literally how to have sex for us, it kind of forces us into this like learning process that is self-guided.
Mm-hmm.
And what you find is that often like queer people are actually better at sex because they've had to learn, because we don't have examples of it, or we didn't at the time
Mm-hmm.
in the media, or or in movies. Like we just didn't have any of that, so we kind of engage in this process, which can be painful and sad sometimes, but it engages us in this, okay, how do I have sex? Like this inquiry around our sexualities and the functioning of sex. But anyway, I wish I had been taught about it. I wish I didn't have to do it on my own.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean,
I concur with that. That resonates with me. Just even that it's not shameful, that it's not bad, like just in general. Like I tell people, it wasn't until I was in seminary that I even had the mindset, they could even fathom that you could be gay and be a Christian. Like those two are antithetical to each other. And when I was growing up, it's like, that's not possible. So, but seminary for me was very monumental and life-changing, not so much because of what they said or did, but because they provided that space, like we talked about earlier. So creating that space is so important. From my psychological background, call a facilitating environment. Creating that facilitating environment and even a holding environment where people of color, people of queer backgrounds, that they can figure it out on their own, and not saying that they have to completely do it themselves, but that they have that safe space where they can work through, I believe this, I don't believe this, and I don't have to just believe this one thing about sexuality, but I can believe however I want to believe, or whatever I like to do, I can explore that sexually or otherwise. So I think it has implications on sexuality and liberty and sexuality, but I think it opens up so many other spaces, because it's not all monolithic. So one area affects other areas of our life. So if I'm bound sexually, I'm probably bound in other areas of my life. So if I can be liberated in this space, then it helps me to be more liberated in the way that I show up in the world, how I move through the world. So it has so many nuances that it impacts.
Yeah, it's funny that you bring that up, because the whole reason why I got into sex education, why I became a sex educator, had nothing to do with sex at all. For the better part of my life in my early years, I often struggled with simple communication, just kind of like sharing my opinions, my mind, sharing my thoughts. And one day I was literally Googling, how do I become a better communicator? Nothing about sex. And what came up was the sex positivity movement and this idea that, if we can learn how to talk about sex, if we can learn how to locate our desires and our boundaries and communicate those to partners, we can talk about anything.
Yeah.
And so I was like, okay, well, I guess I'm gonna learn how to talk about sex.
Yeah.
And so I went to this like great program, and I just got certified. I'm officially a certified sex educator. But I entered this program where it really kind of blew my mind on how interconnected sexuality is to our whole being. That's the problem. We siphon off sex and sexuality from the rest of our lives as if it isn't just part of us. It's what makes us whole. And so,
and I think even with that, of course, we're queer men, but I think it's for everybody across, regardless of your sexuality, sexual orientation, it impacts us all in our humanity, to be able to be free and to love who we love, and express one other thing that it's a part of this. It's like masculinity, toxic masculinity, and how that comes into the conversation,
Yeah.
because I have to act masculine and I kind of present a certain way. I can't have my broke wrist, or something's wrong with me kind of mentality. And so again, going back to how that impacts the way that we show up in the world and how we police our own bodies, and how that is so damning. I don't need anybody else to damn me, because I'm doing it myself. I'm policing myself. I'm keeping myself in bondage, and how that even causes us to fall into the system of white supremacy, of patriarchy, of all these other systems. Like, we belittle and humble ourselves and put ourselves in a box, so no one else has to do it, because we're doing it to ourselves.
Yeah. I want to ask you, because you brought it up earlier, the moment of you going to seminary and kind of discovering, yes, I can be gay and Christian. And I want to loop in one more thing in there for you. This, in my experience, so much of, I guess, anti-gay religion, there is sort of this ideal of masculinity, or what we kind of categorize as masculinity, kind of wrapped up in that conversation. And so for you, what were those moments? I don't know if it was like a simple moment where you discovered you can be both Christian and gay, but what was that process like for you, from coming from, I guess, I'm assuming you were closeted at some point, to making this recognition? What did that mean for your definition of masculinity and your gayness and even your blackness? Let's throw that in there. And then your Christianity. How did that all kind of?
It just threw a grenade in there and just blew it all up. Like, it's everything was like, okay, which I think was part of the seminary experience. It did cause you to deconstruct a lot of things, and a lot of stuff. I would even venture, I graduated from seminary in 2018. And even now I'm still unpacking some of those things and kind of repacking and trying to figure out what I believe and how those things. So that's part of the process. But just trying to, it wasn't a linear process. It wasn't a like this kind of thing, but it was all and nothing, if that makes sense. Kind of, it was the whole experience, but then it wasn't anything in particular that caused a shift or caused a change. It was, so it's hard to answer that question. That's a good question, but it's hard.
Was it
difficult.
Like a frightening time? I don't know. What was it kind of? What was it like, spiritually, emotionally?
Yes, it was challenging, because I was being taught something completely different, something new, but it was hard and challenging even now to go back to the spaces that I grew up and having the conversations with my family members, where I'm kind of growing in this area or growing differently, moving in different directions, and they're still arguably in the same spot where I was before I went to seminary. And they're still having the same conversations, still grappling with, is it okay to be gay? Is it okay to, so it's sad for me to sit with that, and the realization that some of these relationships will never be the same. Like, I can't have the same conversations that I did before, because I'm in a different space than they are.
Yeah. Hearing you say that, I think us being here at Union is I always think of it as like it's such a gift, learning, for me personally, learning the ways in which I can help reinterpret, Christian ideologies or biblical texts for people in a way that is liberative and sexually liberative, to be specific. And one thing, and I'm so excited by that, and I'm learning ways to do it. It's so great. But one thing that I find myself often worrying about is, like, as much education as I'm learning, as much as I'm understanding and can see and can, help interpret and help people understand, we're still going to have to deal with the pressures of what's been here before. So going back home and being like, yeah, well, I read this in the Bible and it doesn't actually mean what you think it means. But I guess I bring that up to say, there is just, in the way of sex, in the way of masculinity and blackness, we are sort of born into a world of scripts where
Mm-hmm.
it's like, this is how you're black, this is how you're a man, this is how
This is what it
you
means
do
to be black
sex.
and what it means to be a man and to means to be,
That's right.
yeah.
And it's so much like that, you know. And so for people who are exploring sexual authenticity and liberation, relationship authenticity and liberation, you're still going to have to come up with what's out there in the world. And so that's like a very real reality and challenge of doing this work.
Yeah.
Do you find that in your practice and speaking with folks around their sex lives and things like that? Is it something that people could be resistant to, or?
Yeah, very, very much so. People are resistant because even though you might say, I want this, I want to be free, I want to do these things, but there's still a lot of baggage, a lot
That's
of
right.
unconscious things, that shame and guilt and those types of things that just are naturally there. Those embedded theologies that are naturally there. And so that's part of the work. I come from a psychodynamic approach to therapy, which kind of along the lines of Freud, but it's the goal and the healing process is to make the unconscious conscious, so conscious raising. So that's really the purpose of that. So sitting, that goes back to that holding environment and that sitting with people and allowing them the space to feel safe. Which I might get pushed back, I might get challenged on that, but that's part of the process too, because even for myself, speaking from my own perspective, I've gone to, coming from fundamentalist churches, I've gone to churches that were liberal and free and all those types of things. And even in these spaces, I still was like traumatized. So it wasn't. I was like, I know they're good and they're have all these wonderful theologies and queer theologies and types of things, but because of my previous trauma, theological trauma, that was still impacting the way that I engaged in those communities. But I needed someone to be able to just say, okay, come as you are. You can wrestle, you can grapple, but I'm not going to challenge you on that. I'm just going to love you how you are. How you show up is how you show up. And that's okay. And I'll just be here with you along the process.
That's great.
So walking with someone along that journey is very powerful.
Yeah. And affirming people. It sounds like you're in the business of affirming. Like, you're okay. You're worthy as you are, which is that's when sex education feels spiritual for me. It's not a spiritual practice. I mean, I guess it is for me, but what I find, when people come to me with concerns about their body or about a desire that they're having that they are scared to have, something like that, a lot of what I do is just tell people, it's okay, you're normal. There's nothing wrong with the way your genitals look, or there's nothing wrong with the fact that you want to do sex in this different way, or there's nothing wrong with the fact that you don't want to have sex. I think, we forget about asexuality.
We do, because that's something that everybody's supposed to have sex, but then
right.
that's another way of shaming people, of causing
That's
people, like, everybody might not want to have sex, and that's fine. That's okay too.
Yeah.
So loving people where they are, I think, arguably that is the gospel. Kind of loving people where they are, not to trying to force them to be this thing, or they have to assimilate to this type of position or whatever the case may be, but just you are free to be you.
That's right.
That's liberation.
It is.
Yeah.
As long as you're not hurting anybody, as long as you have consent, it's all good.
Yeah. So I'm wondering, for you, a sex educator, how do you, we're two queer Black men, what do you tell people around being in our social location and the white gaze? How do you engage that? Because there's a lot of times where we can be fetishized. We can be like, I want to be with you and kind of worship you, and like you're the king that you are. And how do you engage that? How do you tell people to handle that, even if you do like role play where slave and master types of situations? Like how do you?
Yeah. Ooh, heavy topic. Trying to figure out what angle to come to it from, but for me, especially when I'm working with people of color, I take it as my duty and my charge to give them the tools to liberate themselves in the way that looks like for them. And I mean that very seriously. So I ask, what does liberation look like for you?
That's good.
Is it hooking up with white men? Great. Is it hurting anyone? Are you being hurt in the process? Are you giving consent in the process? Are you being fetishized, but you're okay with it? Great. Live your life. And that's all I can do. You know what I mean? I think, especially, I think that interracial relationships are so stigmatized in a way that we're not really talking about. I think it's something that we think is a part of the past. Oh, we had Loving versus Virginia, and it's all good, but it's still very much a stigmatized relationship style. I think for very real reasons, Black folks have experienced harm, sexual harm from white people, and we still do. And so, in a way to kind of combat that, we police ourselves in ways that I think can sometimes be an overcorrection. I hope I don't get in trouble for saying that. But you look online and you see, oh, you're dating another white guy, or you're dating this Asian guy. Oh, you don't know Black love. And that's a whole other conversation. Like, what is this definition of Black love that involves policing and shaming people, So I don't know. I think that the best thing that I can say and do as a sex educator is give Black people the permission to live the sex lives, the relationship lives that they want to live. I may not like it. Susie Joe may not like it. But if you like it and it's not hurting one, go for it, live it. And I think that is true liberation. And I think that, we talk about Black liberation all the time, but sex is never really a part of that formula. And it needs to be. We're not fully liberated until we can enjoy ourselves and be our authentic sexual selves.
And our bodies. We are bodies. We are not just spirit. And even in seminary, we're very heady. We're all in the head. But we are embodied beings. And what does it mean to show up and to enjoy the body, the skin that I am in, regardless of how skinny or big or whatever the case may be, just to love the skin you're in.
That's right. Yeah. But this, on the other side of that, too, is that, the conversation around racism, I think, you hear, I think people are talking about it more and more. There was a time on like these apps like Grindr and things like that, Tinder, where you would see no fats, no femmes, no Blacks, no Asians. I don't see much of that anymore. That doesn't mean it's not there in covert ways. But, I think that white gay men need to have a real conversation within themselves and within their communities about what does it mean to have sex with someone else who's not white. Like, I don't know if it's smart as a white person to jump into interracial sexual relationships willy-nilly, if that makes sense. I think there are questions that need to be had, there are conversations that need to be had in order to make sure folks aren't harmed in the process.
These terms, there's a whole lot of terms out here. And one thing in my work, I'm finding like what a term that means one thing to one person does not mean that term means the same thing to another person. But from your understanding, like what is kink, what is fetish? I still grapple like the differences between that. And how can they be liberative as we're talking about liberation? How can they be liberative?
Yeah.
Or liberating?
Just for this, I won't go into the weeds and to how like each term is defined, but things like kink and fetishism, to me, they are pretty much ways that are alternative sexual experience that don't look like what the scripts that we've been given in our life look like, right? They're not always missionary sex, and it's not always sex with one person, and it's not always straight sex. And so, but how they can be liberative, easy. These are things that give people the space to imagine and to live the sexual lives that they want. Therefore, liberated. I think kink is so important for people who come from marginalized bodies.
So we've talked about sexuality and being open to having spaces where people can do that. One other thing, we'll get to this, is we talked about polyamorous relationships a little bit and how relationships look different. Like
Yeah.
they're not always the husband and wife, cisgender woman and cisgender man, but it's a whole multiplicity of arrangements that can work. I have some clients that are in thruples and clients that are in open relationships where they might have a primary partner. So many terms. I'm still learning all these different terms, but a nesting partner or primary partner, and then they open up to other people. Sometimes some of my clients, they communicate with each other. What they have varying degrees of communication. Some people want to know exactly. It's usually, in my experience, one partner wants to know a little bit more about the intricacies of what happens in the sexual intercourses with their partner when they're outside of and the one partner is like, I just need to know the big picture. I don't want to know all the details. And regardless of if it's the genders that are together, like it's usually one person that wants to know more and one person that wants to go know less or whoever. But even in that, just being able to offer that space for people to explore, like I think that's an ongoing thing that keeps coming. Like they can explore and on their own terms, and to be able to navigate relationships and push the boundaries. And this is my experience, my takeaway from seeing my clients. But and it's challenging and it's hard for people to hold, but I believe, this is my perspective, I believe that my clients that are in open relationships that do it well are healthier than my clients who are in monogamous relationships. What I mean by that is, to do polyamory well, you have to communicate. You have to over communicate, I would argue. You have to kind of say and be self-aware. These are the things that I like, what I don't like. When jealousy starts coming up, whatever things start coming up, you have to communicate these things. So in lots of my monogamous relationships, they just don't have these conversations. They just kind of brush it under the rug, don't talk about it. But to do polyamory well, you have to open it up in conversation and over communicate.
Yeah. Especially that jealousy piece. I think that's very difficult for people.
Yeah.
I think we come from a society that it's very like jealousy adverse. And I get it. It's like such a tough feeling to experience.
Yeah.
But it's also so human and so normal.
Yeah.
And it's something that can be moved through and managed and processed and put away. And this is the gift that, different relationship styles can give folks, that these ways in which to practice these like very difficult emotions that won't kill us,
Yeah.
And I'm so glad you brought this up, because one of my most liberative days of education in my sex ed program, we had a panel all about alternative relationship styles, different relationship styles. And the entire panel must have been about like, I don't know, maybe 6 or 7 people. They were all Black. I had never been witness or known any Black person that was not in a monogamous relationship. And to see Black older Black people, all kinds of Black people being like, oh yeah, I'm in a polyamorous relationship. I'm open. There was somebody who was a relationship anarchist.
What is that?
So that is like, I don't do relationships. I just have sex, and that's what it is. And she was like an older Black woman. And what does that mean for an older Black woman to own? Like, no, I think I don't do relationships. And I'm just gonna be out here, and I'll make sexual relationships and partners, but I'm not going to be bound to any kind of script of what a relationship should look like. And so this is what I want for my Black people, for us to let ourselves imagine and to create the sexual lives and the relationship for ourselves, rather than going by scripts that has caused so much harm. Not that there isn't good there, right? I'm not saying that monogamy is bad, but
Well, this has definitely been a meaningful and moving conversation for me. I know that both of us this is our first year, ending the first year at Union. So I'm going to answer the question as well. But for you, what has changed? How has Union impacted you, your worldview, your life view, your
that's such a
queerness?
Question. Yeah. I think, being my first year here as a seminarian, here at Union in particular, I find Union's professors and sort of union ideology to be one that is so unafraid of nuance and asking questions that can't be answered, that shouldn't have a single answer to.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of this multitude of perspectives and views. And as I am getting older, as I'm living more life, that is starting to feel just so right to me. Like that we don't have answers. And how great would it be for us to be able to be so comfortable with discomfort that we can sit in nuance and ask nuanced questions, because I just think that is where humanity lives. It's not ever black and white, right or wrong.
Mm-hmm.
It's all gray. It's all nuance. And so I'm just loving kind of being in this challenging, nuanced, gray gray educational experience.
Leaning into the gray,
Yeah,
huh?
yeah.
So I would even to kind of add to that for me from the professorial side, it is amazing to be in a atmosphere, not saying there's not other atmospheres out there like similar, but where I can show up my full authentic self and have that celebrated, and like we can have this conversation for
Yeah.
union. Like how many campuses across have
Yeah,
these
this is the only
conversations? So just to be able to, for us to be sitting here and to talk, have these conversations are so meaningful and so powerful. And I think that's even through my classes, I'm learning as much along with the students. Like it's not like we are, like I'm the expert and the students don't know anything. No, we all have our own life experiences and knowledges and epistemologies, fancy word for knowledges, that we bring to the table, and all of those are celebrated. And we don't have to, especially in this time as we're the season of unrest, if we can call it that, we have varying degrees, varying opinions about various things, but we don't all have to agree. We don't all have to be like, we have to have this one consensus, but we can have a multiplicity of experiences and thoughts and beliefs and still do community.
That's right.
So I think for me being here has really opened up that space. Like we can disagree and still love each other and still walk together in community. And I think that is powerful.
Beautiful. I also want to uplift the fact that a professor and a student are sitting here, which you mentioned before, but we're having this very interesting conversation together. And I guess I just bring that up to say that I love that Union isn't afraid to kind of, again, bring some nuance into the dynamics of into the intellectual dynamics of a professor and a student. And so it means a lot to me that I'm able to sit here with you and have a conversation like this. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.